You're welcome.
Cool.
Hey, Denny?
Yes, I did something interesting on the racism test. I went through it, and as I was going through it, things were going well. And then I thought, what if I make a wrong, what I felt was a wrong choice on purpose? And what I think I did was I did it on purpose, and at the end, it came out that I was moderately leaning towards white people. And I think those two purposeful errors did that because they were I chose them when they were good, or excuse me, when they were bad on the bad side,
Mm-hmm.
and I chose them when I got that red X. I only did 2 of them, but it only took those 2, I think, to sway that to that side, which what I felt was quite interesting. Just a thought.
I found it challenging working with the speed, like just answer as quickly as possible. And that kind of, actually, I took the test twice. So.
How many white people on this call lean towards white people? How many Black people on this call lean towards Black people? Okay. Just curious, anybody else?
Did anyone else want to share your experience?
Mary Ann? You're muted, Mary.
You're muted, Mary Ann.
You're muted.
Unmute.
Yeah, I was clicking the wrong button. I am so sorry. I came out little to none in terms of bias, and I attribute that to the last 3 years that I taught at NDP. I'm sorry for the hat. Our sun, the sun is shining. We had some situations at NDP in which young women of color were told that their hairstyle was against the dress code. And in some cases, there was company coming, and so this person needed to fix their hair or whatever. And I taught some of those girls, and I remember getting so angry and learning as a result about the hair. And so I think I was kind of aware of it when I did that. I don't know how I would have done if it had been 4 years ago. But because I had experience with real people who were in real pain over people's attitudes toward their hair, I learned a little bit.
Thank you both. Should we?
Anyone else?
Sure.
So John?
I took this test for the first time about 12 years ago. It was in the Montgomery County school system, and it was something we were encouraged to do. The interesting thing happened there is I was on a team of 5th grade teachers. Half of us were white and half of us were Black. And what I found interesting, and in fact, the poor Black guy who was the young, popular rap singing teacher in the school just shook his head when he finished the test and said, "I can join the Klan anytime I want." And So I've been thinking about this sort of test for a while, and I'm wondering if it's actually measuring what it claims to be measuring. And is it actually measuring each individual's personal biases, or is it overall measuring society's biases? And there's no answer to that question, but it's something I think is worth considering.
Jody, we want to thank you for last week once more before I turn the evening over to you. And maybe, would you like to respond to anything John just said before you begin your actual presentation?
Yeah, actually, it seemed like that was a lot about implicit bias, that we do reflect society's bias. I mean, there were a lot of examples of some of the Black people that were biased. The gun one, I don't know if people remember the gun example, where they also saw the mistake more often as a gun when it was a Black face preceding it. Certainly the children with the dolls experiment, but again, that we do internalize a lot of society's bias, and then it does come out in us also. So I think you're right, they're intertwined.
And would you like to continue?
Do you want me to start, you mean?
Yeah.
Sure. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So last month we discussed bias, and I know I particularly focused on implicit bias. So briefly, if you live in this world and have a brain, you have bias. Implicit bias, remember, operates at the subconscious level, and it's triggered by automatic mental associations that we may not even agree with or desire. And that's the tough part. Our brains gather evidence to support our biases. So tonight, I'd like to present some information about artificial intelligence. I know there have been AI scares. I'll keep saying AI, so artificial intelligence. AI scares about machines taking all of our jobs and robots taking over the world, etc. But the more realistic and very current actions are more likely corporate decisions based on assumptions like a Black or Latinx person is less likely to pay off their loan on time, or a person named John makes a better programmer than Mary, or a Black man is more likely to be a repeat offender than a white man. These are very real decisions that AI has made recently. And in 2020, Shelley Palmer of the Palmer Institute said, "It is everyone's individual responsibility to understand AI bias, which is probably one of the most important issues facing us." AI helps decide if you get a job, how much you pay for car insurance, your credit score, even your rating in an annual performance review. All these decisions are filtered through assumptions about our identity, gender, race, and age on the computer. If real people made these decisions, some would be against the law, but they are often going unnoticed as they are made by machines. AI bias is a very real anomaly in the output of machine learning algorithms. These could be due to prejudiced assumptions during development or in the data used. In the last few years particularly, companies have been waking up to this very real danger. You've probably seen some headlines and articles like that. More than 180 human biases have been defined and classified by psychologists, and each can affect individuals as we make decisions. These biases could seep into machine learning algorithms when programming designers unknowingly introduce them to the model, and/or the data is skewed. For example, most psychology research studies include results from undergraduate students who are a specific group and do not represent the whole population. Here are some specific examples of AI bias. Amazon started an AI project in 2014 to save recruiters time. Their project was solely based on reviewing resumes and rating applicants by using AI-powered algorithms. However, by 2015, Amazon realized that their new AI system showed bias against women. Since the algorithm was using historical data to train its AI model, the system in which males had been dominant in the tech industry, it learned that male candidates were preferable. Thus, it penalized resumes that included the word women, as in women's chess club captain. To Amazon's credit, it recognized the bias and stopped using the algorithm to recruit. Here's one example of racial bias in healthcare. In 2019, researchers found that an AI healthcare risk prediction algorithm used on more than 200 million people in US hospitals falsely concluded that Black patients were healthier than equally sick white patients. This racial bias predicted which patients would likely need extra medical care. However, the algorithm was producing faulty results that favored white patients. The designers used previous patients' healthcare spending as a proxy for medical needs. This was a bad interpretation because income and race are highly correlated, as we know. There are numerous examples of human bias in tech platforms. Since data on these platforms is later used to train machines, these biases lead to biased machine learning. In 2019, Facebook was allowing its advertisers to intentionally target adverts according to gender, race, and religion. For instance, women were prioritized in job adverts for roles in nursing or secretarial work, whereas job ads for janitors and taxi drivers have been mostly sent to men, in particular men from minority backgrounds. So they did change their practice, and Facebook will no longer allow employers to specify age, gender, or race targeting in its ads. Also, the Facebook algorithms are designed to ensure you are on Facebook as long as possible, so as to expose you to as many advertisements as possible. They first use an attention grab algorithm. Outrage is the surest way to get your attention. By design, topics you are likely to be outraged by find their way to your Facebook timeline. Secondly, your own prejudices and quirks are fed back to you and not challenged using the echo chamber algorithm. You are soothed into believing that your outrage is shared and that your ideas are mainstream. The impact of these is that Facebook is polarizing its community. The social media platform is designed to push you to the extremes of your inclinations by feeding you a barrage of content that you find outrageous and feel the ardent need, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to switch that, ardent need to respond to, and the echo chamber removes the doubt that you could be wrong, that there could be other quite reasonable ways of seeing a situation. If you are a regular Facebook user, there is a good chance you are being radicalized. You are being pushed to the extremes of positions you care about and encouraged, deliberately so, to disparage and despise, not just disagree with, but despise views, any views that are different. I'll bring this up later when we talk about some specific biases. So what could you do about it? So one response option is to delete your account, but many, especially the younger generations, would find that nearly impossible. The other much harder option is to train yourself to bring morality, skepticism, and a desire to hear voices outside your echo chamber. A terrible side effect of Facebook's business model is the quieting of the middle. In other words, dismissing the many reasonable voices that can disagree, but respectfully so. Preventing that radicalization is up to me and you. The key is to develop your own manifesto about how to be on any kind of social media with integrity. These could also be guidelines for personal conversations. So talk with your families about these. These are personal, and I'm just going to let you read them. I think these will come up again. Kriti Sharma, these are just more examples. Kriti Sharma is the Vice President of Artificial Intelligence and Ethics at the SAGE Group and the founder of Artificial Intelligence for Good. She said when she logs on with her photo that you see here to give advice, she gets questions like, what makes you qualified, etc. But when she changed her profile picture to a cat with a jetpack on and changed her screen name, she did not get any of those patronizing questions. Machines are also reinforcing our biases. How often do people use a voice recognizing system like Siri or those home systems to turn on the lights or create a shopping list, etc.? They are almost always female voices designed to be obedient servants. Most of the male AIs tend to be more high-powered, like IBM Watson, making business decisions, or Ross the robot lawyer. How do these affect a student in the real world? They Google so much for projects that they do. When the data appears in stereotypical form, which is common because it's built on historical data, their biases are formed. Barak Turovsky is a designer of Google Translate and found some bias in the translations. Here's an example of Google Translate taking the Turkish gender-neutral language and translating this way. They actually did catch that, and now they rewrite with 2 choices for nurse and 2 choices for doctor. but how many go unnoticed? Just last month, May of 2021, Twitter admitted that its photo cropping algorithm was biased. So it deactivated the automatic image cropping function on its platform 9 months after they began receiving complaints that the feature cropped out Black faces from photographs. And in 2019, a facial recognition study showed that the technology sometimes used by law enforcement misidentified people of color more often than white people. So can artificial intelligence ever be unbiased? Ongoing identification of new human biases is constantly increasing. Therefore, it seems impossible to have a completely unbiased human mind or AI system. However, some of the best practices for our own bias work also hold true for minimizing AI bias. Minimizing bias will be critical if artificial intelligence is to reach its potential and increase people's trust in the systems. Talk with those budding techies in your family. I know a lot of us are not in the business right now, but we all interact with people that are still working. We have family members that are maybe even involved in tech developing. So it's something that we really all need to be aware of. In the process of building AI models, companies can identify these biases that have gone on in our country for many decades. We need to teach machines carefully so we don't just repeat our past mistakes. But the good news about AI is that it is totally in our control. Everything that comes out of a machine starts with some input. It might be cute to make personal assistants in the 1950s Mad Men style, but it procreates bias. Let's try to be more aware of our own biases and look for them in computer-generated material. We need diverse teams creating AI and teams that look for bias. We need programmers of different races, genders, sexualities, and backgrounds. Companies need to include diverse ethicists, social scientists, and experts who best understand the nuances of each application area in the process of creating AI. People who first notice bias are mostly users from the specific minority community. So include diverse designers and checkers is crucial. Also, giving programming diverse experiences is also important, because AI can actually achieve a more equitable world, but we have to build it without our biases. While AI has enormous potential, there are challenges that must be brought to the forefront. Several organizations have put forth well-intentioned recommendations. The Women Leading in AI organization, for example, has outlined several recommendations, including a ban of all male panels at tech events, and the introduction of an assurance mark for companies to demonstrate that they have followed due process in their deployment of AI, including recruiting a diverse team. UNESCO has delineated several recommendations aimed to help mitigate gender stereotypes in AI. These recommendations include a call to end the practice of making digital assistants female by default, as well as a call to explore the feasibility of developing a neutral machine gender for voice assistants that's neither male nor female. We need our government and corporations to build our AI systems for everyone. Fifi Lee is a chief scientist of artificial intelligence and machine learning at Google Cloud. And she has urged, quote, "We all have a responsibility to make sure everyone, including companies, governments, and researchers, develop AI with diversity in mind." Her mission to democratize AI is one that we should all be working towards. As Lee reminds us, technology could benefit or hurt people. So the usage of tech is the responsibility of humanity as a whole, not just the discoverer. So again, talk with all those budding techies in your family. And next time you scroll past an advert online, think about the bias that sent that to your screen. I know there's a lot more about AI, and hopefully people will search into a little bit more. But I wanted to end here with some particular biases. Last month, I demonstrated many different examples of implicit bias. I'd like to return to that and identify and define some specific ones. Then we'll open up for discussion. In 2016, Brian McLaren, an author, activist, and public theologian, watched former President Trump vanquish opponents, and he asked a psychologist to send him articles to explain Trump's popularity. The doctor sent him 13 particular biases, and I thought 9 of them especially related to our racism work. I will identify each with a brief description leading into our open discussion, and I'll pause on each one a little bit. And then at the end, I will bring all 9 up onto the screen in case you want to jot down any notes or anything. So the first is a confirmation bias. The human brain welcomes information that confirms what it already thinks. So we have racist associations, and this confirmation bias keeps us from questioning them. Those 2 Facebook algorithms I mentioned play right into this: the attention grab algorithm using outrage, and the echo chamber algorithm reinforces your opinions. Secondly, the community bias. We put tribe over truth. We flock together with people who share our perspectives, and we compound our biases. To show you how strong and automatic this is, consider this. If you split up a large group into smaller groups, maybe by color of shoes or eye color, and you have them talk together for a while, maybe favorite music groups or anything, then have them come back together and ask them to share something. Let's say you pass out M&Ms and you ask them to share M&Ms. They will actually allocate more M&Ms to their own group based on just a few minutes of bonding. We have a social bias to our own group. We need to start thinking that our tribe is all people. That was the community bias. Third, contact bias, pretty similar. If you lack contact with someone, you won't see what they see. Many of us function primarily within our own in-groups, and this has a lot to do with our racial bias. In our neighborhoods, our schools, our churches. We may have a friend or 2 in the out group, but does that really show us the diversity of that group? So we come to opinions that are varied and diverse within our own in-group, but are quite simple about the outgroup and quite overgeneralized. Four, confidence bias. We mistake confidence for competence, and we were all vulnerable to the lies of confident people. Maybe we can talk about how white privilege has exacerbated this. Fifth, cash bias. Our brains are wired to see what helps us make money. It is very hard to see anything that interferes with our way of making a living. I see this as having huge implications on our structural disparity, where whites have been the decision policymakers. Sixth, competency bias. Our brains prefer to think of ourselves as above average. We think we are right. As a result, we are incompetent at knowing how competent we really are. I have seen this over and over in high school with pressure on coaches, parents arguing that their child deserves more playing time because he or she is much better than those in the first string. So think about how this fits into our race discussion. Seven, conspiracy bias. When we feel shamed, we are especially vulnerable to stories that cast us as victims of an evil conspiracy by the other. In other words, our brains like stories in which we're either the hero or the victim, but never the villain. Yet throughout our history, our country has cast Black people as villains, or at least lower in value. Eight, comfort or complacency or convenience bias. Our brains welcome data that allows us to relax and be happy, and our brains reject data that requires us to adjust, work, or inconvenience ourselves. How often have injustices surfaced only to fade away again as we relax into our complacency? And ninth, normalcy or baseline bias. Our brains are wired to set a baseline of normalcy and assume that what feels normal has always been and will always be. So before we open the floor for discussion, could everyone take a few minutes to quietly reflect on how you see any of these biases intersecting with racism, or anything you'd like to share about artificial intelligence? Let us consider ways we might interrupt or reduce the racist impact of what comes to mind. While these 9 are on the screen, you may want to jot down the names of a couple that you'd like to mention, or an example to share, or a helpful strategy to diminish them. Now I will give just a little time to reflect on your own. And I'd also like to ask the Holy Spirit to enter into our thoughts and our conversation.
Jody,
Yes,
could you put that back up? I was writing them down and I haven't.
so sorry. I'm gonna have to
Thank
share
you.
the screen again, just a moment. We can also send them in an email also
Okay,
afterwards if people want to keep it that way.
While Denny's writing, would anyone like to share?
Yeah, I have two examples of social trauma that exemplify some of these biases that we talk about today. I could read it, what I have.
I got it. Thank you. Hi,
Uh,
Dan.
okay, I'll just try to read them as quickly as I can. Years ago, when my mom purchased our home, it was in need of some repair. She managed to hire a contractor to do the work. When the work was complete, everything appeared satisfactory. Some years later, a neighbor who is a handyman was working in our bathroom to put up some new drywall. When the area under the old drywall was exposed, the N word was written in large letters with dried glue. It was evident. My reaction was to recall the face of the worker from years ago as someone not to be trusted. So that's one. I guess when someone uses that word, it's disparaging, and they actually show a type of bias that we've mentioned already just now. Another example of social trauma happened when I was in college. I was more embarrassing than anything else. I was riding a shuttle with other students, and the bus stopped to pick up some students. And one of them was a white male about my height, but maybe 35 pounds more than myself, sat down in my lap, and I didn't say anything to him, and I didn't move. I just sat there like a dummy while he proceeded to speak to everyone on the bus and humiliate me. When he finally got up, he sat in the chair right in front of me, crowing proudly that he was a redneck. To this day, I regret that I didn't do something, yet if I had a notion to fight, someone might have gotten hurt or worse. The only thing positive I can say is that I survived even without my pride. So those are two examples of bias. This guy, as a redneck, has certain biases and thinking that he's much better than African Americans.
Dennis, the other good thing is you turned the other cheek and you
Mm.
were by far the better man. So
Right.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Thank you so much.
uh
And I think Father has his hand raised. You're muted, Father.
I know, I just didn't get to it quick enough.
Sorry.
I actually have a question for Jody.
Mhm,
In terms of all these 9 biases,
mhm.
the piece that's missing for me in terms of addressing them, because I think certainly, as you have talked about last time and this time, deepening awareness, but it seems to be there have to be reasons why those particular biases happen.
Mhm.
And to understand the root cause of those biases would allow us to get to the root so that biases don't even begin to develop.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense? And if it does, is there any reflections out there in terms of why those biases happen? What do they serve? We don't do things unless it serves us for some particular purpose. So I think the question becomes for me, is there value to trying to, in addition, dealing with those biases as they come and we become aware of them, to also try to understand the why behind it that really brings an end to the source of the bias itself?
Mhm. Definitely, no, I agree. I mean, I guess I think of them in a couple different categories myself. And again, I'm no expert on this. I've just been studying it some, but one category I would say that a lot of us are selfish creatures, or that we go for things that are, best for us. I mean, most people choose things that they want. So I think a fair number of them fall under that category. I think some of them, in terms of like the brain being wired a certain way, thinking, I think of these ones like the tribe over, being, people want to do what the people that they know are like, and the people they're in contact with, and all of that. It seems is so natural. I mean, think in terms of your own children. I mean, who doesn't want, the best for their children? How often have decisions been made so that people put their children over someone else's, for example? So just off the top of my head and thinking of categories, I would say those are two major ones. Maybe someone else wants to jump in here. I know Audrey spent time on that too. Mary Catherine?
I think a lot of them stroke everybody's ego, make you feel
Mhm.
better about yourself, or they're easier, like they talked about the one for comfort. You're going to take the easy way out, or you want to be in the in group, not considered an outsider. So I think a lot of them just stroke our comfort zone, or our, our easiness, or what we're used to.
Right.
And it's just easier. I thought when it came to the one about people that are speak with great confidence, whether they have competence or not, I kept thinking maybe that's why so many people follow Trump. He talks like he thinks
Absolutely.
he knows the truth and he's got everything right. And they, he sounds like it. And so therefore they're going to follow him, whether he's telling a lie or the truth or anything. And I thought maybe that's part of why all these people follow him. It's
Right.
kind of
Yeah,
almost
they
like a
believe it.
cult, kind of like a cult.
I
Yeah.
They
definitely
aren't
think
really
too
thinking.
that comfort bias, we do relax in our complacency. I mean, a couple of examples. After Freddie Gray, I was sure things would change, but, and yeah, I went to some rallies and things, but I didn't get to work. I didn't get to work on this stuff. After every mass shooting, I think, well, of course, now everybody's going to be, people want what they want. And I think, yeah, I love that comment, relax into our
Hey, folks, I'm
complacency.
a little bit busy right now.
I
Yeah.
Can I
I
call you
also,
back?
huge.
I also think that you opened up a
Can I call you
really
back?
important area, Mary Catherine. I think often because of
Hey,
the
folks, can I call you back?
combination of
I'm
some of
busy right
these biases, our tendency to think that we're above average, or that our view is right and all of that, that when we meet an exception, that doesn't really jar our bias. Our first instinct is to say, well, you're different, you're an exception. So we actually try to maintain the validity of our bias that hard, and not really see the evidence to the contrary as evidence to the contrary, but an exception to the rule.
Mhm.
It's interesting. There's something called mimetic theory, which I think kind of plays off of what Mary Catherine is saying, that maybe below it isn't we feel good about ourselves, but we actually feel bad about ourselves.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the
Mm.
way that we, and mimetic theory would say that the way that we make ourselves feel better is by diminishing someone or something else, which is why the gospel is so pivotally important, because its fundamental statement is that everybody's a child of God and created in God's image. But we certainly have not learned that.
Right.
I was about to say, and of course, it doesn't come from the gospel, it comes from Berenstain Bears, which we read to our kids growing up, but the whole book about bullying and the explanation that some people need to make themselves feel better by making other people feel worse, which I think Ray is saying much more profoundly, but Berenstain Bears are good.
So we,
Before we go on, can I just mention, I did talk to Ryan Sadler, and anybody who wanted to go to the call to action on the racism tonight, he is recording that. So you'll be able to watch it or listen to it later in case you were going. That starts at 8 tonight. And I just didn't want anybody to think that they were missing it.
I might jump off because I'm supposed to help facilitate.
Okay.
So.
Peggy, I
Girls.
also just wanted to thank Dennis for his very personal comments, and say, as a brother, Dennis, I think most of us, if not all of us, carry a couple of those kinds of traumatic memories, and where our reaction was the same. For me, one that I always think about was when I went to this miniature golf course off of Route 40 with a bunch of my close seminarian friends, and they all paid and got their entrance card, and I went up, I think I was next to last or something, and I went up and put my money in, and she pushed it back, and she just looked at me and smiled and said, "I'm sorry." And it dawned on me what was going on, but I was so shocked and embarrassed. I just stood there frozen until one of my classmates said, "Miss, would you hand back all the money for the previous 8 people, please, all of it?" And then when he got in the car, he said, "I'm angry with you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Don't ever just let somebody insult you like that again without saying something about it." But I just froze.
Mhm.
So I think we all have those same memories.
Yeah,
Shocked.
yeah.
I'm probably
Adrian,
speak
did
for
you-
all of the white people when I want to say I'm sorry to both of you.
Yeah. I think Anne had her hand up and then Phil. You're muted, Anne.
I wasn't raising my hand.
Oh, Audrey, I got a chat from Audrey saying you were raising your hand. All right, Phil, go ahead.
I want to offer a little hope.
Good.
I've spent the last 2 months interviewing young artists, young theater artists in this country and in Hungary with an average age of 25 for a new project we've just launched that's will run to 2025. I hope I'll be running it till 2025. It's called Linkages. And it's putting together Americans and Hungarians, theater artists. The Hungarians have just been ousted from the takeover of the right-wing government of the Academy of Drama and Film. And I've got the most diverse group of young people that are Latinx, African American, broad spectrum on the sexual identification, sexual identity, half male, half female in America. And I have to, I'm lit when I'm talking to them about this deep dive into another theater culture, I'm on the listen to see if there's any of this. And I'm not finding it in the 25-year-olds. And it's so different from my talking to my 25-year-old granddaughter, because that's a family thing. And here I am at 80, literally I've talked to about 50 young people in the last 2 months, and will eventually work with something like 7 and 21 for the next 4 years of people that are open and generous and questioning. So, I just see as every time that clock ticks, we're shedding some of this. And that really gives me hope.
Thank you, Phil, and thank God. Did anybody else want to give an example of anything? Well, I actually thought of, I don't know if anybody watched BBC tonight, but they had something on artificial intelligence. They had a musician and he played the piano, and then they had written these programs using AI to choose accompaniment to go with what he was playing. And then he gives concerts, and it's always a surprise because he has no idea what it's going to sound like. So there's AI used for good, or for joy anyway. I thought that was really interesting. Denny, you're muted.
I want to share something that my brother told me years ago, but it has stayed with me all this time, and it's been upsetting, and I think it fits in with what we have been talking about. My brother was in the Air Force, and he was an Air Force aircraft mechanic, and he became a crew chief. And a crew chief is in charge of a group of aircraft mechanics. The difference is that they are assigned to a plane. And so wherever that plane goes, they fly with the plane so that they can do the maintenance or repair or work on that plane, no matter where it is in the world. It could be in the Mideast, could be in Europe, could be in the United States. Wherever it goes, they do the work on it. And he enlisted, so he only spent 2 years in the Air Force. And he came home, and I said, "You have all this skill. You have this skill. You could have gone to any major airport in the United States with this talent, and been, a very important member of an aircraft maintenance crew, if not a leader of a group." And I'm apologizing for me, and because I didn't really respond. He said, "I can't work with blacks. They're lazy. They don't want to work." And I said, "We've got a whole hell of a lot of white people around here that are the same way. What the hell are you talking about?" And he just said, "I can't work with them because they're lazy." And that has stuck with me, and has bothered me for this time, because he threw that bias in there that basically probably stunted his career, because he was so biased against the Black community and the Black people that he was working with. And he just went back to little old Bellefonte, which is a time warp, and went to work in a local factory. And it kind of, it was hurtful for him to say that, and it was a part of our family that has been, I've identified as being very racist. And this was a very, very good example of his giving up his talent because he was racist.
Thank you,
And
Tony.
that was I still think about that a lot and still think about him. I love him to death, but he was wrong. He was absolutely and totally wrong to make that kind of a statement in that decision.
Thank you, each of you who shared something. And Sharon, you have a quick comment here?
Mhm.
I think that it makes a difference what you do on an individual basis. They will never write a law. They will never have a movie. They will never be the one thing that converts the mass of humanity in America or anyplace else. What matters is what you do and see on an individual basis every day of your life, and what steps you do or do not take. Often when you see someone of color or a woman being drawn out for laughter or ridicule or discrimination, the more comfortable thing is to say, oh, that's really bad, and walk away. The more difficult thing, extremely, and sometimes not always very uncomfortable, is to step forward and step in, to become a part of the situation and work to try to help the person who is being cited, who is probably uncomfortable, humiliated, angry, and at the same time show the people around that this isn't how it has to be. We learn one by one, we change one by one. I believe that.
Another thing, though, that a person can do that is on the easy side, and it's happening virtually every time anything happens anymore, is you can take out your cell phone and videotape whatever's going on. I am absolutely convinced that none of the stuff going on with police departments today would be happening if it weren't for the fact that people took videotapes of it. In the past, it had always been, oh, that's an isolated incident. Oh, that didn't really happen that way that have. But now with all the cameras and all of the videos out there, people are seeing what's really happening out there. And it's making a difference, I think.
Thank you.
John, did you hear on the news where the young teenager who took the video of George Floyd was given a special citation, Pulitzer citation?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
Wow.
great. Well, thank you all so much for your input. And thank you so much, Jody, for the excellent work you did, all the preparation and educating us. Because we know we can't eliminate biases overnight, but our increased awareness is instrumental in our ability to change. So we truly appreciate it. And we appreciate you and thank you. And for everybody who gave us some input here. And let us continue to help each other. Sharon brings up such a good point. We all need to help each other and step in. And that's why we truly appreciate, Skip and I have talked about how much we appreciate you all coming back to this effort, because it's just so needed. So we have also been working on a path for St. Vincent's to take regarding reparations, or we may call it racial equity. So we believe it should include acknowledgement, the fund, of course, and the path that we will take. So with acknowledgement, we drafted a letter that we would appreciate your input on its content. And also proposals of what we should do with it, where we should send it to the newspaper, or should we ask a reporter to interview a group or report for a wider audience with a reporter. Anyway, that would be, of course, after approval from the parish council, and if we want it to come from the parish and not just from this group. So if we have time, I'll share that letter on the screen tonight. Otherwise, I will send it by email. And we would ask you to think about that and any comments, what you think, how we can improve it. Synergy is a wonderful thing. And we also would ask you to think about maybe a brief acknowledgement that perhaps we could make for the side of our church, our big banner. And we would want it to connect with a biblical phrase or a Pope Francis phrase to get to what we want, to acknowledge our wrongs, if you want to call it that. And then the second piece is the fund. We explored a couple of options using the Catholic Community Foundation to manage our racial equity fund. And though the Archdiocese hired the foundation to manage funds for parishes, the Archdiocese would have no control over our use of our funds. So there are two options offered by the foundation. One is the type that was used for the St. James and John's endowment, and it required large upfront amounts. But there's another one, it's a donor fund, and it might suit our needs, and it allows for anyone to contribute with any amount of donation once we've opened it, which we will do. And then this would accommodate more parishioners' involvement. So that's also something to think about. And then we have the path. And listening to your feedback back in April, many wanted our path to address education, and others said it must address the structural and systemic racism for real change. So we defined structural and systemic racism back in October, but we know we have people who subsequently joined the group. So just to reiterate, structural and systemic racism encompass the entire system of white domination infused in all aspects of society, including its history, its culture, its politics, its economics, and our entire social fabric. The reinforcing effects of multiple institutions and cultural norms, policies, and practices that create advantages for white people and disadvantages for people of color have racism rooted everywhere. And Jody highlighted how ingrained our biases are. So the impact of the book, The Black Butterfly, was powerful, summarizing much of the structural and systemic racism. Remember Dr. Brown's approach? To improve Black lives, you must improve Black neighborhoods. And I know Dennis Moore and I were talking about the book, and he felt strongly about that approach. And I was wondering, Dennis, would you mind sharing more of your thoughts about that?
Okay. I had written something down here, but you covered a lot of what you was in the book anyway. So it's just one part that I could mention. So that's our goal. And we're going to have to create a map to get there, for racial equity. And I think we can debate and argue about what it will look like. Although I think that Brown's ideas are ambitious, especially in the post-pandemic world where we spent trillions of dollars already. He says these ideas can be adapted, scaled, tweaked, and tailored to help heal red-blind Black communities in cities and counties across the nation. And so on page 254 of his book, he has a number of ideas and projects that we could focus on. And even though they cost billions of dollars, we can always, talk about how much is going to be spent and other things we can do in the neighborhood to bring about racial equity.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. And I don't think our fund will quite have billions in it.
Right.
Like you said, we can pick something in neighborhood. Thank you very much. We also have, oh, are there any
I
other?
see two hands. I
Oh,
see
great.
fathers and Sharon. Yeah.
Okay, let me get off my thing. Sharon, go ahead. No offense, Father. but-
Unmute yourself, Sharon.
I hadn't lowered my hand, so I didn't raise for this one. It was for the one before.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
go lower my hand.
I thought that was Father's hand too, was from before. But
No,
it's-
no.
Okay.
Let me share I think many of you know I spent 30 years working in the area of child abuse and maltreatment.
Mhm.
One of the phenomenons that has been somewhat frustrating, I think, for a lot of us is the plethora of organizations to try to impact the issue of child abuse. Oftentimes, these plethora of different organizations have their roots in a particular child or person who was dramatically impacted by abuse. The difficulty is then we only do spot interventions, and then the money that could have been gone, the money that could have been used for direct service, a significant amount of it then goes into administrative services for each of those organizations. So the question I have, Peggy, is there some effort to draw together all of those organizations or groups or individuals who are looking at the issue of reparations, and I like the word repairment, so that there's a diminishment of managerial costs and the ability to have a larger and perhaps more sustainable impact within whatever particular community is focused on.
Yeah, we've been exploring a few different things. One, we also have had a team of volunteers with experience in neighborhood progress, exploring options for us. And we want to thank Joe Cronin, Joe McNeely, and Dan McCarthy for their work. Thank you so much. And Selwyn and Ternesh Kasaray and Jim Casey were part of the group, but circumstances kept them from participating. So probably some of you know their backgrounds and their expertise, and they have recommendations, especially for those interested in education, such as tutoring or mentoring. And they still have some calls and follow-ups, so we can stay tuned for that. And then Skip and I have reached out to a couple of Black parishes or neighborhood organizations because we know how important that is, to your point, Father, in kind of joining maybe with other efforts. And we want to know too if anybody has had success with a partner parish or community that we may not be aware of. So we also think it's important, and knowing that our fund will not be billions of dollars, we also thought that maybe if we can make an impact in one neighborhood by joining with a community organization in that neighborhood or a parish in that neighborhood. And I believe, I don't know, Mary Catherine, the Racial Justice Circle is working through the Archdiocese, of course, to try to get parishes. Where's Mary Catherine?
She got off. She had to get off.
Okay.
Get off.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. To get priests and parishes more involved in this. So, I mean, maybe eventually there will be an effort there with Catholic parishes, but we know how slowly some of the bishops, et cetera, work. And so we did not want to wait for that. So we have some things, and your call to the pastor at St. Francis Xavier is, one avenue to maybe combine. That's one neighborhood that we've been looking at, Oliver, to maybe see if we can make some, I don't know, help support organizations or people in that neighborhood that are actually working. So we agree wholeheartedly, but we don't want just a Band-Aid. We want to really try to make an impact in if we follow Dr. Brown's theory in a neighborhood. But it may be through education. Some of the recommendations of Joe's group is that, you know, we can mentor people. We had something in the e-news last week, I think, about, or maybe the week before, about if you could drive somebody to their workplace. So there are some things individuals can do, but as a group, we kind of wanted to join with an organization or church. So, but there aren't many churches working, especially Catholic churches, working on this. So, but let us know. Yes, Skip.
Yep. Yeah, Father, I just wanted to say, I think you've put your finger on an extremely important topic. And I don't know, one of the reasons we're trying to reach out to people is to see if there is any kind of joining together going on among organizations. You know, bureaucracies have a life and existence of their own, and you can have 6, 7, 8 groups working on the same thing, but who's going to subordinate, or, you know, all of that. And so it never seems to just come together and coalesce. Everybody's trying to keep their piece going. We're trying to reach Father Reverend Al Hathaway, pastor of Union Baptist, because he's been involved in a lot of things over the years, and we thought that he might be able to give us some sort of insight as to groups that are significant working with the neighborhoods. And maybe it would be wonderful, as you said, maybe where groups are coming together and not working piecemeal at something. But I mean, you put your finger on something, and it may take us a while to really come up with just what we're going to do and where and how, because these questions are so important if we're to ever get to do something that we think is having a systemic impact.
So I don't know how you feel, if it's too late to bring up that letter. Do you want me to just send it out to you, or? Okay. All right. So the only other thing, we know a lot of people vacation in July, and Skip and I will actually be gone the first half of July. And we were wondering if we should not gather in July and pick up again in August. We would hope to have explored some different options by then and can have a targeted discussion. Or would someone like to volunteer to lead the group in July?
Peggy, I like the idea of July off, and reassembling in August. But if you and Skip could give us some homework where we could devote this extra time to thoughtfulness, planning, ideas, etc.
Okay, well, tomorrow I will be sending out the acknowledgement letter, well, the letter to the newspaper, or which addresses the acknowledgement, the fund, and the path. So that should be a really good guideline for what you can think about and recommendations you can make, not just how to craft the letter or what else you'd like to see in it or what you'd like taken out, but also, especially with the path that we're going to take, feel free to give us some suggestions there. So I think that will definitely be homework. And Robin Whitlock used a phrase that I loved that I will borrow if I may. So for your 4th of July celebrations, happy Interdependence Day. Now please mute yourselves, and Jody's going to lead us in prayer.
A child frequently wandered in the woods. Over time, his father became concerned and asked why he went there. The boy answered, "To find God." His father said, "That's a very good thing, but don't you know that God is the same everywhere?" The boy responded, "Yes, but I'm not." As we meet in this group, we are in a space of care and determination to make Black lives matter. I pray that God's grace will remind us wherever we are to have open hearts and minds and eyes so we see God in everyone. When our biases kick in, God help us to recognize and see with the eyes of Jesus. To him there is no out group. Henry Nouwen said, often we want to be able to see into the future, but mostly we have just enough light to take the next step. Yet when we are able to take the next step with the trust that we will have enough light for the step that follows, we will be surprised at how far we go. Dear God, fill us with your grace and light to recognize how to do this work as best we can, taking the next step to forge communities of inclusive kinship and tenderness. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jody.
Thank you all.
Excellent job. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Father said everybody has homework, so don't forget that.
Have a happy July.
Okay,
Thank you.
Too,
guys.
Sharon.
Good
Thanks.
night, everyone.
Night.
Goodbye.
Good night.
You all.
Thanks.
See you.